Good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Barrett, a little bit distracted by a front row conversation of the farmer's market, where I haven't been yet, but I think we have the same favorite things. Ramps ketchup, the bread,
And
Wave Hill bread, and I have developed a relationship with the kombucha guy last year, I would say, because he offered to send it to me over the winter, but I didn't. But I'm so happy. This is apropos of nothing. I really did want to say I feel like June 12th starts our summer season. It's Wellness Wednesday, the first Wellness Wednesday of our season, the introduction of our farmers market, and a lecture by my new dear friend, Michelle Okadonor. We've also just opened the Burleigh Marks exhibition. If you didn't have a chance to wander around earlier this morning, I hope that after the lecture you'll all go, eat something yummy at the farmer's market and then walk over to the conservatory. The Burleigh Marks exhibition is, for all of us here, really starts on the 6th floor. Burleigh Marks was what is Edward Sullivan, our guest curator, called a total work of art, which I said sounds like someone from Southern California, like a totally, but really he means it in a more serious fashion in the German sense, which is kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is the total work of art. An artist who worked in plant material, in textiles, in paint, he painted on table covers. It seems like anything that he could get his hands on became the materials of his life. And it is so apropos, I think, of that kind of total work of art that we're here to listen to Michelle today, which, as I've gotten to know you over the past year, you represent a lot of the same qualities, a deep, deep, deep care for the environment. You're a brilliant teacher, just like he was, an aggregator, an accumulator of people and friends, all of whom then become even more interested in plant material, the expressiveness of plants themselves, the patterns that come to bear on them, and how, I think, in the subject that you're about to talk about today, how even a stand of trees that you didn't create becomes expressive of something that you love and that you're fond of, and then it comes around and becomes something else that you create, these visions of ours. So you're the opposite you personify the opposite of the problem that I think we're focused on a lot these days, which is plant blindness, the idea that people don't know enough about plants, they walk right by them without really, really seeing them. So it was one of the reasons why we invited Michelle to be our artist in residence. People keep asking, what's the project? And I say, it isn't a commission, it's a lens. It was inviting a creative being into our midst of horticulturalists and scientists and educators to spend time with us, to help us see our campus, to see our plants, to see our world in a different way. Now she's talking to all of you, visitors and friends of the garden, to help us see ourselves in a different way. A project may emerge as we continue to talk about this, but right now what we're really enjoying is actually Michelle's perspective on the sort of work that we do here in nature. So I'm going to sit down and enjoy every word. My friend Michelle Okadonor, thanks for being with us today.
It's so nice to be here, to walk through the tulip tree alley and understand the planning that went into that. It was explained to me when I was here last by Todd Forrest that as they have ripened and become old, new ones have joined. So this time I was looking to see who were the grandparents, who were the parents, who were the grandchildren. So it becomes a living thing that connects to our own process. So in the beginning, that's Miami Beach. It's not the one you recognize, but there was first nature before humankind, before words, what I call primeval Eden. We're looking at part of an elongated north-south barrier island, a sandbar actually, deposited by ocean currents, particle by particle, over the course of geologic time. Waves and the prodding action of trade winds caused the sand to mound above sea level. Seeds arrived by air and they drifted in, and ultimately covering the island with salt-resistant trees and shrubs, mostly mangrove. Saw palmetto, which is really right here in the front, created a ground cover over much of the sand dune. This beautiful photograph, which I've nicknamed the Realm of the Gods, was given to me by a family, a pioneer family. This is 1918, 100 years ago, and Shige Toshiro, the young Japanese gardener who took this beautiful photograph, arrived just in time to witness a primeval site forever altered. Before his eyes, the dense Florida native landscape was cleared, the timber and the brush were burned, and fill material was dredged from the bottom of Biscayne Bay and added to bring up the irregular swampy surface. Fertile muck, that dark organic soil created from drained swampland, was dug up from the Everglades and floated to the site on barges. The new Miami Beach was a construct created by humans and nature together. The Roman statesman Cicero had a name for this human modification of the original landscape. In the nature of the gods, he said, "We sow seeds, we plant trees." It seems that man creates with his hand a second nature. But it wasn't until the golden age of the Italian Renaissance that third nature was added to the corpus, making it an evolutionary progression from primitive wilderness to functional agriculture 10,000 years ago to aesthetic communication. Neither art nor pure nature, the mingling of the two created properties of their own. So this is why the first gardener came to Miami Beach. He was brought to create a fantasy that it became. He was born in 1880 south of Tokyo in a small village, the son of a silkworm farmer. He left Japan at the turn of the century, last century, for California, where he apprenticed and learned gardening skills needed to tackle the frontier ahead. A few years later, an early settler hired him to plant a garden among the scattered orange and grapefruit trees west of Miami, on the Miami River. And the royal palms they planted remain there today. It took him 2 years to install a Japanese garden. Now, when I first read that there had been a Japanese garden, I thought, why? It's tropical. But then I realized it was pine and sand, and what's a Japanese garden if not that? So it's more copacetic than it sounds, because Dade County is filled with this Pinus eliate, these beautiful slash pines, or it was, and lots of sand. Then Toshiro quit his job and was hired. He crossed what was then in the world the longest wooden bridge ever. They built from Miami to Miami Beach, and he joined Carl Fisher, the visionary real estate developer who grew up on an Indiana farm. What was nice is they were both sons of the soil, and they transformed together a barrier island from native scrub to tropical paradise. So this is the Dade County soil bar, and the muck was really fertile. It's filled with moisture-retaining humus, and combined with Dade County soil with its component of quartz, an ideal medium for planting now covered this island. The quartz was fine-grained, rounded at the edges, loose, unconsolidated, minute grains of crystalline silica. What was interesting to me is finding the soil bar and looking at this is I've always asked, why was Miami Beach so different? Why was Miami Beach such an Eden? So I see now it had all these ingredients, and what it was, that in a way this is the recipe. It is the most abundant, this silica, surface material still today in the state of Florida. So Miami Beach sand, that is me 70 years ago, is half quartz and half shell. And it's commented the intensity of which I'm already collecting shells. It's packed firmly, but in recent years, due to erosion and of wave motion and more frequent and intense storms, the beach has been disappearing rapidly. In the mid-70s, before we really understood what we understand today, the profundity of it, the federal government had a program, and it was dredging up sand to restore the shoreline. I actually followed the dredgers because they were taking the sand from way out, and there were all these shells that were being spit out as they worked, and I thought this was really a party. But I didn't realize what they were messing with they were messing with everything. They shouldn't have been doing it, because after that, when the next storms came and the sand went away again, they started importing it on barges from the third world. And obviously, all that cannot continue to go on. So another reason why it's so fertile and green and beautiful in Miami Beach is the Oolitic Limestone. It enabled Fisher and Toshiro to get very quick results, because it is the bedrock. There's a little bit of a spine in that sand dune, and it absorbs and holds moisture. So the roots of the trees and shrubs they planted dug deeply into the rock, and it tapped a source of constant moisture. Well, of course, today we know that constant moisture in the room for the roots makes it all so porous, and we understand the value of that. So once I understood all about the limestone, I went out to the University of Miami Geology Department, and they gave me these slides on, I love them, they're oods. And you can see they're these little balls, and it turns out that they mined them. They're limestone, they were used in industry. This is the cross section, but they're so gorgeous. And they create, when they're pushed together with lime, sedimentary rock, which was also so beautiful to look at and had so much rhythm. That's the Miami River, and these are the original royal palms that Toshiro planted when he first came to the Miami River. And even though that's a very old picture, they are still there. I just went online yesterday. I was so excited I could hardly finish this talk. And that they're still there because I'm going to Miami, and of course the first thing I'll do when I get off the plane is go right there. And in where it said it's this hidden little park that's left from an old garden and nobody knows it's there. Nobody knows it's there. I quote unquote lived there all my life and never heard of it. So but there they are, these beautiful royal palms. And this beautiful image, that is the Miami Beach Nursery. Within 36 months, 3 years, Toshiro was able to open his own business, Miami Beach Nursery. He specialized in royal palms. I mean, they were local. They were growing in the Everglades, easy to source, and he also offered landscape services. It was 10 blocks from my house where I was born. And there's the family. Can you believe what a beautiful family? So the first family, really, of Miami Beach, besides the Native Americans, I don't think they came over very often from the Everglades, but was a Japanese family. And Miami Beach Nurseries. Now, my mother knew him very well because she had 2 houses to plant, and she was a very urban New Yorker and knew nothing about planting. And the little boy Joe, he remained in Miami, west of Miami Beach. He eventually moved, and I visited him, which is how I received these photographs. I went to visit him, it must have been the 90s. He was so glad to see me. It was just like a note from a past, and his wife went into their garden and got me a bouquet of flowers that I never seen before and I haven't seen since. I once did glimpse them somewhere, but I will find them one day. They were red and white. They must have been a hybrid. I don't know what they could have been, but I remember them. Anyway, he said he grew up with my Uncle Eddie, and Mickey Wolfson was with me that day, and he said, and I grew up with your brother Louis. And the three of us sat down and talked about old Miami. So those coconuts didn't cost Joe Tashiro anything. They just, so he distributed them and planted them. And here's the most beautiful image, a germinating seed, and that was given to me by another great pioneer of Miami, Julia Morton. And she was more than a pioneer of Miami. She was the pioneer and invented the field of economic botany and ethnobotany, and received the first award in 1978 for ethnobotany, and Michael Ballack, who's here, received the same award in 2009. And I'm wondering if he knew her at all. So University of Miami started in the early 50s, so I got in my car again and drove out there. It was not that far, out US 1, which used to be all these old slash pines, and now are gone. And I visited Julia Morton, and it was quite an experience, you know. I think when you study one thing so long and you become single-minded and ferocious. So that she ended up giving me glass slides, which I think are from the 40s. And this one is my favorite one. It just captures that thrust of what Isaac Bashevis Singer once wrote about, how life began in the soil and how the rotting seed was pushing up. You get that sense here. And I was thinking too, where are all the writers today? We know of a few, of course, who were celebrating the life force of plants. Now, according to Genesis, God created plants on the third day. I think and then we came next. So without them, we wouldn't have eaten and we wouldn't be here. We need to recall this. Here's great Julia Morton. And her basket was celebrating the local tropical fruits. And she was self-educated, but became a professor and spent 50 years at the University of Miami. And she was sent during the Vietnam War into the Everglades by the United States government to find plants that people who were stuck in the jungle could eat. So she was quite something. She was married. I know she worked on some of this in partnership, but she's managed to, somehow seem singular. I didn't realize there was another Morton until I went to check on her dates and found her award for ethnobotany. So here is the royal palm tree again, and that's on the state seal of Florida. And what it is about these trees that I grew up with is they perfumed my life. They were everywhere. They weren't just growing outside. They were on the school flag I saw every morning. And the Florida state flag is particularly beautiful. It's white. That seal is in the center. And then there's two red crosses behind it diagonally, which I don't know what they mean. But it's a very beautiful flag, and every time I'm back in Florida, my eye always goes for it. And this is the seal of the city of Miami Beach. What's shocking to me is incorporated 1915, but a city, 1925, and I was born 20 years later, so I can't believe how young that city was. And when I arrived, what I love about this too is there's the big sky, there's the sandy beach, there's the water. It's all there. It's Eden. Of course, they've stuck in some transportation, so there's ways that tourists could come. They were already thinking. And this is Montezuma. She was great. She was kind of, who was the great songwriter today? I can't even think of a songwriter anymore, but she moved to Miami. She was really hot stuff, and my parents knew her. Everybody then was kind of played piano or made music and would get together in living rooms, and she would always perform. And she wrote Seminole Lullaby and Let Me Love You in the Florida Sunshine, all these great songs. But look at that palm tree. That's the state palm. That's the sable palm. And if you look at the ridges, there's these things they call boots. So what interesting gardeners would do to differentiate from the guy next door and make a little bit of money is cut the boots in a rhythmic way, kind of very decorative. Meanwhile, the boots are houses for frogs, ferns, bromeliads, lizards. They were very lively, so you'd like to look at the tree, but you didn't want to stand that close because, the expression leaping lizards, they really did leap. So there's 3 different palms: the royal, the coconut, which was appropriated by Miami Beach, so it would seem like this great tropical island, and then this wonderful primal one in the Everglades. Now these are the coconut seeds, so I can be a thief at times, and these spathes that shoot out from the trees, if you grab them when they're still green and firm, or if you travel with a pocket knife and take them down and you peel back some of the soft cover, you see, you don't see that picture, you don't see that image unless you are, you get it before it bursts open, because once it ripens, it doesn't have that intensity. But what I love is the way that moves like a snake and how it's compacted, and I love the color. So often when I had a home in Miami, I would arrive, I would go out, I would take a few of these, I would peel back, and I'd lay them out so I had them with me, and then I would take them back in my luggage to New York. The problem was Miami became a drug center. So as I would wrap up all these beautiful things, my luggage never arrived in New York because it was removed by the TSA in the X-ray, because the plane had originated in Cali, Colombia, and they thought I was moving drugs. Nobody would believe I was moving botany or taking the time to wrap them so beautifully for the love of plants. So now that is so beautiful. The seeds left to their own without me interfering and taking them away, open like this, and it's really like snow. And they're so fragrant. I'm not the only one who appreciates them. There are more bugs, bees, insects that buzz around them, so you have to be careful. And you have to watch where you're going when you go to pick them up. So here, let's see where we are. So as I said, it's been 100 years since the transformation, from the primeval to now. Today, Miami Beach occupies a large place in the imagination of people whose aim it is to worship the sun all day and party all night. And we have a famous moon, and it defies, in a sense, the small scale of the island. They come from all over the world. Miami Beach has become public property, well advertised, and easy to get to. But this morning, I'm going to show you private space. In fact, you'd probably be arrested at most of these sites I'll show you, and give you a more personal narrative away from all of the glossy and the magazines. So this is Pine Tree Drive. This is 100 years old again. And another daughter of Florida, Harlem Renaissance writer Zora Neale Hurston, who lived not too far from here, really, for a while, began her autobiography, Dust Tracks on the Road, with the following words: "I have memories within that came out of the materials that went to make me. Time and place have had their say." The house on Fairgreen Drive, where I grew up, was situated in what was called the Orchard subdivision. Originally, the land was supposed to be an avocado, mango, and coconut plantation, but the hurricane of 1926 erased the dream. These north-south rows of Australian pines were planted to protect the orchards by breaking the strong ocean breezes that come in from tropical currents crossing the Atlantic. And when you think about it, you stand on the beach between Miami Beach and West Africa, there's nothing blocking the wind, and sometimes the wind is pretty strong. So, of course, you know, he imported, because there was nothing there once they cleared it, these windbreakers. And then between our home and the Miami Beach Nursery, these trees, which is now historic designation, Pine Tree Drive, is about, let's see, 300 trees, and they're 70 to 80 feet tall. They're supposed to live, they have a life of 40 to 50 years, but they've been here 100 years. Clearly, they love living in Miami Beach. They have mostly been left to their own device, you know. Nobody's bothered these trees. Miami, you know, they just been, quote unquote, there. And then they developed all these burls and growths, and then they were noticed because they started to be what I call behave badly. Their roots were tearing up the street, and they wanted to break the asphalt. They needed more fresh water, and they caused they were like they wanted more civic space. So now they're considered naughty, and there's lots of articles in the paper about finally taking down these invasives. They're really beautiful. Now, an additional row was planted at the end of this alley along 28th Street, perpendicular to Pine Tree Drive and to Fairgreen Drive, where I grew up, running east and west. Now, they were also supposed to be windbreakers, and they were going to stop the wind so that John Collins could build a golf course, and that was right, again, across the street. So I grew up in the 1950s before air conditioning. I mean, maybe a few people had a unit, but it was very, very rare. So houses were built like our home, which was built after the war, with double exposure windows, it was called. So I had lots of windows, and we slept with the windows open. So I could hear in the wind the pine trees, and they really were sighing. I mean, really made this just sighing, literally. And I thought of them always as the island's harp. You see the needles. And I mentioned this recently to somebody, and they said, well, have you ever heard Respighi's The Pines of Rome? And I said, of course, but I never put together that all pines were musical. I thought they were just our pines, because our pines aren't even real pines. They're soft needles, and so I'm now going to have to listen again to Respighi and see what I think. these are the monstrous burls. I mean, looking at that, that's like 5, 6 feet across. And if there's a loose piece, I don't hesitate to bring it back. And I try to take a morning flight in case there's a problem. So there's the Oka family, and behind us is a hedge of Australian pines. So they were used as hedges as well as big windbreakers. And my parents had a library in the starting, and people used to bring them books because my parents were disconnected totally from the vocabulary, let's say, of the tropics as urban New Yorkers. One of the books was Miami Beach and Rhyme. Of course, my father knew all these people, and they're always signed to him, and they're very joyful. So in Miami Beach and Rhyme, the author wrote, "A hedge of Australian pine is velvet to the touch and guards against intrusion. All over the beach you'll find this windbreaker growing in profusion." And it's true. There it is on the right. And that house is by Russell Pancoast, who was the famous first architect in Miami Beach and a relative of the descendant of John Collins, I think the grandson. Now, that has to be a picture before 1951. In 1951, an unnamed hurricane, they didn't name him in those days, came, and the next morning after all the howling, I went outside and there were 2 cavernous holes, but no trees. Like the trees weren't down, they were just gone. So I don't believe they understood until Hurricane Andrew in 1992 that hurricanes spawn tornadoes. I don't know when that connection was made, but I could have used an explanation because as a 5-year-old I was like, I was terrified. You know, what force could take away those trees? So aside from that, the Everglades, speaking of forces, used to burn. And I remember it mostly from this house because they then mistakenly stopped the fires. I think they let it burn again now. But I used to stand on that lawn when I used to hear the grown-ups say, the Everglades is burning. That's pretty fearsome also. And remember the sense again of the power of nature, the force. So Wallace Stevens also felt all that, the great American poet, and he loved Florida as much as I did. In fact, Harold Bloom, the author, and he's a professor at Yale in humanities, he kind of chides Wallace Stevens for his unabashed love of palms. So every time now I see palms like this, I think of his great poem, Nomad Exquisite, which is as the immense dew of Florida brings forth the big fin palm and green vine angering for life. Like, what a thing, a vine angering for life. I love the fact that he probably went to the top where the tendril was and asked the vine what it was doing, going up the tree or something. I mean, how do you think that up? But every time I would stop at a light, waiting for it to turn, I'd look right or left, and sure enough, there was a palm with a green vine angering for life. And then it goes, as the immense dew of Florida brings forth him and him from the beholder. Of course, we sang to our trees. So in me comes flinging forms, flames, and flakes of flames. That was the spark. Really, really nice. Those royal palms were planted by Toshiro. That's at the side of our house. It's about has to be 1950 again. And they're still there. This is a walk I take often. And I can see from my father's, the black Cadillac, 1949 Cadillac, what year. It's wonderful looking through these images because I become an archaeologist and anthropologist. And then the mango tree. So one of the ill-begotten mango trees remained behind our house. In fact, in that first picture of the house, I said to my husband this morning, I can see that damn tree because nobody in my family ate mangoes, so the tree bloomed. Well, nobody ate mangoes in the 50s, mangoes like, yeah. And the first agricultural czar, Nathan Mayo, finally did a cookbook for Florida housewives because they didn't want to talk to avocados, mangoes, the fruit, they didn't know anything. You have to remember, it was, as I read the other day, inhabited by Anglo-Saxons was the term I saw. So it was a very foreign group of things showing up at the rare markets. So these things would fall, these mangoes, and take over the yard. And the tree was big enough to give me shade, so I used to hang out. But then the bees would come, and the wasps. And I got stung. I must have been 4 and went screaming into the house. And to this day, when I hear there's mangoes in the entree or in something, I say, no, thank you. And when I go in New York in the summer, you can smell the mangoes at the fruit stands. I just crossed the street. Oh. I still don't like mangoes. I associate them with something else. And then spiders. They say those spiders are common spiders and they're harmless. Well, you tell me, they're this big, and I'm just having none of them. So this is my Florida library, part of it, and it's been deconstructed and I'm reconstructing it on its own in New York. And there's a lot of early books. I have the first book of palms, and I have New York Botanical Garden books, because John Kunkel Small was working here and went to Florida. He was even earlier than John Collins and Shige Tashiro. He came in 1902. So I found first his Ferns of Florida. Where I found these things, it's like nobody was like saying, would you like this? I would see them at flea markets in these boxes of, what are they, ephemera, Florida ephemera. And for a while I would be driving up to St. Petersburg for the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair. I don't think it exists anymore, but that was like 35, 40 years ago. And this is a journal. I'm sure you have all these, but you might not. I have these very strange reprints that are, again, almost 100. They're 100 years old. So there's John with his buddies, with David Fairchild, and there's a man there, let's see, Henry Nerling, and he wrote in books, they named their books like Enchantment of Florida, and they believed in the siren call. The love affair and the willingness to express it is something so missing from our conceptual and, we've tightened up so much. We've become more academic. You'd have to prove everything you were saying. I can actually, but who wants to? Why don't we just feel some of it sometimes and let ourselves have the luxury like they did? These early pioneers, they loved their material. There's John Small in the field. I just love that picture. And here is my exploration bridge, and I'm sure he walked this bridge because it was one of 3 that was built by John Collins 100 years ago. Now that's the 28th Street footbridge in Fairgreen Drive. It's 28th, that's 29th Street, it's 28th Street, and Australian Pines stopped at 29th Street. So you see, this is a hood. And this was all right there, and a child of 6 or 7 could walk all of this very, very safely. So that's how I became best friends with all these trees. That canal, until very recently, had, though it's a waterway, Indian Creek, had the original mangroves left. You can see them. And the best thing to do with those bridges is you could bend over the edge. It wasn't so high. You could look down, and you could catch your own reflection with the trees. So it was the best way to lose oneself, and even a new word that I love so much, to unself. And that theory comes from Elaine Scarry, who teaches at Harvard. I love what she teaches. She's professor of aesthetics and value. And she said, what is it when you look at these things that happens to us? Well, if you're one of us who bothered to come today, you're people who fall in love, and in the face of beauty, you unself. She used the sunset as a metaphor, but she also started her book on beauty with the palm tree. She said she used to hate them, these tall things, and then the silly flopping, you know, on top. And then she said she saw a Matisse painting that he did from his bed in old age, and she saw the refracted light on the spheres of the frond. And she said, truthfully, I had to reconsider my animosity towards these trees. This is the other waterway, the Indian Creek you just saw, and this is the other one by my house, and this is the canal. And look at those sea grape. They're still there. That's all still there. I just took this picture about a year and a half ago. Just leaned over like I always do, and it's still so beautiful. You could still lose yourself. You could still not think that there are hotels and nightclubs in Miami Art Basel. You can just look in the water there. Or you could look up at the sky. Those are frangipani, and those are across the street from the Russell Pancoast house. And that tree belongs to Pat Sokol, my neighbor there. She was 100 years old, so look at all the centenarians we have in Miami Beach, the trees and Pat, and she has now just passed away, but I went by to see her. Look what she gave me. I'm holding a mango. I just didn't know what to say. And I used to go pick her frangipani blossoms. And there were great stories on 30th Street. She lived around the corner. One of them was her brother-in-law, Sammy Sokol. He was with the Rat Pack. I always wondered what Sammy Sokol did. And nobody could explain Sammy Sokol, but he had the most gorgeous white linen suits. He went to Havana. He was a runner for the Tampa, what was his name, Troppolini or something, the Tampa Mafia. And so when he wasn't working, he would shack up on the second floor of the Sokol's house. And he was a great character. He was always around because everyone would just play up and down the block, and we knew everything, or we thought we did as kids. So now that around the corner from that beautiful, beautiful frangipani is this Royal Poinciana. Now my grandpa, Sam Oka, planted that tree when we moved around the corner in 1951. The night we moved, I had a cold, and I had on like flannel pajamas, and my father carried me around the corner, to the house. That's the kind of place it was. So nobody got dressed to move, you know, you just went. And my grandpa had a handyman named Jim. It was amazing when I look back that our house didn't have a screwdriver or a hammer, no tools. My father was not engaged, let's say, in using his hands. And so Jim was a frequent visitor. It was the people who came to visit do remind me of the novel of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlins, because most of the people who, like seeds who drifted down to Florida, were leaving another life in somewhere else and had a story. And of course, I always had time to hear the stories. I was fascinated. So poincianas, they inspired everybody. I love Mr. Nerling, who was in the picture. He was a great botanist, and actually David Fairchild, he was mentored by him. But there was a poinciana festival, so more people wrote about the poinciana than I can tell you. Even George Merrick, the developer of Coral Gables. When is the last time we had a developer who wrote poetry? You know, maybe we should have a developer poetry contest and see if we can bring it back. But the best one was written by, we had a Florida poet laureate, which every state should have, Vivian Larimer Yesler. And she won the 1953 contest when poinciana blooms. So she wrote superlative. The poinciana's bloom is brief, well, so are ecstasy and grief. Superlatives like flame and song are not meant to last very long. Another poem, 1936. I mean, just glancing through my Florida poetry section, which is pretty ripe, I found another prize winner who wrote this, she said, in appreciation of sunshine, health, and beauty. It sounds like your wellness here at the garden. On poinciana's blooming day, her whole vast top is one bouquet. 1,000 blossoms come to bloom, and yet for others there is room. The feathery leaves of scented green are hidden by a floral screen. I sit attentive in cool shade and watch the blossoms, by time betrayed, fall sparse in short grass, a carpet for the feet to pass. And they did make a fabulous carpet. I mean, we loved rolling around in this. We loved rolling around in the soft pine needles, too. We were always on the ground rolling around. Now, this is the old golf course. There were three. John Collins liked to play golf. One was across from me where the Australian pines were on 28th and Fair Green. And this one is right next to it. So you see those Australian pines back in there? All right, I am convinced they are the granddaughters or the descendants of my harps, because nobody went and planted them anymore, and they're not that old, but some of those seeds are still around. And what's beautiful about these trees is they have room on a golf course to really expand. And many of the poets commented on how much space they needed and how they were so magnificent standing alone. So that's something when I'm in Miami I see every single time. I just go by it. But I love what Henry Nerling said. Did I say it already? He said, the first time I saw a royal poinciana, I was speechless. And it is breathtaking. Zora Neale Hurston, back to her, I love what she said. She said about her first marriage, she said, so she marked time by these trees. I waited for love at a bloomin' time, a green time, and an orange time. Of course, love did not come in that marriage, but I love the fact that she was still a young girl when she was married off, and that's From Their Eyes We're Watching God, her masterpiece. This is the baobab that also was planted at the same time. So the three trees, the Australian pine, the baobab, and then we'll come to the banyan, were all put down by the same broad strokes that built this community. And 6 were planted, and Lester Pancoast, the last descendant of the John Collins, Russell Pancoast, I knew him before he passed away. He told me how his family were the ones who put those seeds in the ground. And the seeds came from David Fairchild. And you probably know more than I do here that David Fairchild was very good friends with Montgomery. And there's a lot of Montgomery in both places. I think we have a technical station in Miami. I've been there. Yeah, we do. I'm hearing that. So what's wonderful about these is this. They bloom at night. And midsummer, once the royal poincianas are gone, these take over, and their blossoms are extraordinary. White, 8 inches each, and I wish I was a Florida yellow bat. You see how big it is? You see what the bat's like? That's huge. I mean, it looks like something out of Dr. Seuss. And then the next morning, if you take a walk under those trees, it's another kind of paradise that gives you a sense of even the shrunken one, how large it is. But even this is what it looks like inside. And how I happen to have it is I was in Africa visiting Kenya on the Indian Ocean, visiting an Italian writer, a friend. And she noticed I loved her palms. They were not our palms, and I didn't recognize them lining her shore. And she said, well, if you really are so interested in trees, I hear there's a 1,000-year-old tree, a baobab. Would you like to go and see it? So I said, sure. So off we went on this crazy road trip through the bush. There's no map, there's no nothing. And so we had to stop and ask directions. We finally get there, and they go, oh, yes, we have this tree, but it died last month. So this is 1998. The tree, we went to the site, had just fallen over. And it was so extraordinary, seeing how the wood, the configuration, that again, into my luggage, went to pieces. And so that's how I happen to have this. It reminds me of the compression of that space. You know, what happens when things grow is like nothing we can make ourselves. It's just a life force, an explosion that comes from the center. So you're looking at 2 beautiful Florida birds, ibis, and those are not crocodiles. Those are the expanded roots of the banyan tree. Now, that's a tiny version. That's 1990. And this is more recent, but the 1990 version got a haircut during Hurricane Andrew in '92, and it's more irregular now. But it's as big as like the room you came in, and this. It's architecture. It's a cathedral. And you can see the root in the front, and this little root. I'm not the only one who loves this tree and used it as a place to think and a place to create sacred space. The Black community published about 50 years ago a small book, and they called themselves the Black people of Palm Beach County. The book was called Like a Mighty Banyan, and I'll read to you. Roots of the banyan tree at once reach backward and downward, regenerate, and then reach forward and outward. Moreover, roots of the banyan are multidimensional. They begin to grow below ground like most other roots and push life upward. But there's a difference. At any level, from any branch, tendrils reach back, tenuously seeking the primary source of nourishment. Those that find it reroot and hold fast. They thicken into sturdy single trunks, topped by new branches and sprouts. The tree spreads wide and high. All of its multifacets are intimately bound at some point to many mothering lifelines. This is Mothering Lifeline. I now live near this kapok tree. It offers a window into a palm-fringed sky. Dangling fronds again evoke Wallace Stevens' poetry. Some say it's his greatest poem, The Palm at the End of the Mind. Beyond the last thought rises in the bronze decor. A gold feather bird sings in the palm without human feeling, without human meaning, a silent song. It is not this, then, that makes us happy or unhappy. The bird sings, its feathers shine, the palm sings at the end of space, a fired, fangled feather dangles down. That bird just happened to fly by. And it is a gold-feathered bird, which many people think Wallace Stevens meant is a phoenix, which Miami Beach needs, but it won't help. Here we go. Here is the sky, the big sky again. And I love this. Robert is here, is the entrance, the portal to it, back to the primeval, whatever's left of the Everglades. So we're moving backwards. That's a 5-year-old portrait, May 17th, 1951. And the sky is there. My head is touching it. So aside from always looking up at the trees, the sky, and then I guess I took the paintbrush and I ate that sky. It was nutrition again. The Egyptians knew, and the Greeks knew. All of our ancestors knew what fed us. And this is the most beautiful photograph of Florida sable palms, I would actually probably say in the world, taken by a Viennese refugee in the 40s, Hans Hanau. And I love it. This Sunday I picked up the New York Times, and the travel section said, I'll quote, it says, "The glaciers," front page of the Times Sunday, "the glaciers are melting, the coral reefs are dying, Miami Beach is going under." Oh, I thought, let me just finish my coffee first. Yes. I've brought you into this seductive world for a reason. I want all of us to return to our ancestral DNA, to understand life on Earth cannot exist without my trees or your trees. We have soiled the nest. No decent gold-feathered bird would do that. In the words somewhat of Marjorie Kinnan Rollins, an adopted daughter of Florida, the earth can be borrowed but not bought. It may be used but not owned. We are tenants, not possessors, lovers, and not masters. Thank you.
Few questions from the audience? I think it's loud here. Anyone have a question? That's so profound.
Yes.
I still,
Have you published
Jeff, sir?
this yet?
Well, bits and pieces have been brewing. The things, as I lay out parts of it, I had a palm hit by lightning. I had it's so strong, all of these things. It's so real. It's so meaningful at a time that is, has eclipsed a lot of its own raison d'etre, that I haven't been able to pull it all together, but certainly being an artist in residence here was a great blessing, a catalyst. It came so easily and naturally, and so maybe, yes, how's that? It's on its way. Yes.
Michelle, tell us about, I'm not even sure, is this a painting or a photograph?
This is, isn't that beautiful? It's a photograph, but they hand tinted the sunset, and I thought of Wallace Stevens in the bronze decor. I always thought that meant, if you look at several of the big buildings downtown from the 30s when he was writing, they had bronze grill work, and you could see across the street the palm in the street reflected in it. So I thought, gee, he came to the bank on Southwest 3rd Avenue and he saw this. Because I've seen that image many times since I've read the poem.
And is this a place on Miami?
This was the first pier, Elsner Pier. And I really am so lucky to have these images. It was, my grandfather came in 1938, and he came in 36. And my mother came in 38, and he loved the vegetation. He was from the woods, the great, great woods of Russia. And he knew every bird sound, he knew all the animals, he knew everything, and that's where I learned a lot, because my parents were quite urban.
What drew your family to Florida in those early days?
Well, the same thing that took lots of people. One is health. My father's half-brother had rheumatic fever, and in the mid-30s, early 30s, they would send you to warm weather. And then my mother was a French major at Hunter, and she'd planned to go to Paris, and the war had broken out. And in those days, women didn't go too far on their own. So my grandparents, it was the war, knew friends who had a house, and their son was drafted, and he went to France, ironically. And my mother then had a room to stay in, and she taught Latin at the first private school, the Lear School. And he did not come back, and I am named for him. It was that kind of world, and so it taught me more than anything a respect for all that was around me. And this is something that we won't be able to face the changes coming until we touch that center again, till we know it exists. And I don't know how that's going to happen. But what I said that Marjorie Kinnan Rollins said, we are lovers, not masters, has to become a manifesto. We need another Rachel Carson.